let's just start over again. And that wasn't for y'all in medical school.
Okay. Paul and I were students in the medical school there in laboratory sciences. The way that we came by the assignment was basically because we stood duty every fourth night in pairs. Our duty was to do autopsies. And Paul and I weren't normally paired together. I was normally paired with a guy named Stanley Miller. And I don't know if either I took someone's duty or Paul took someone's duty. I don't remember that type of thing. But I do remember that at 3 o'clock that afternoon, we were told that the president had been assassinated. We were told to report. They dismissed classes. We were told to report to the morgue.
At 3 o'clock in the afternoon of November 22nd, 1963, did you have reason to believe that the president was coming to Bethesda Naval Hospital?
No.
Not until Admiral Galloway came in the morgue.
Right.
At what time was that?
That was in the afternoon sometime, and I remember him saying, "Gentlemen, you're going to get a very important visitor tonight, and you're now confined to the morgue."
Yes.
How many hours later did the body come in? Or how long?
I remember it coming in around 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
But when do you think that he told you that the body was?
Oh, sometime in the afternoon.
Yeah. I
Somewhere
probably,
around 3 o'clock in the afternoon?
No,
I
no.
can't say no.
No, it wasn't, because one of the things that happened, we thought.
All right, I've got to get a fix on the time when you had an indication that the body was coming to Bethesda and not to somewhere else.
I think that I can only say that at 8 o'clock when the body came, because we were told, we were basically kind of kept in the dark. There was an insinuation. Admiral Galloway came in and said that we're going to do this. I don't, in my remembrance, I only think that probably was no more than an hour to 45 minutes prior to the time that the body came in.
An hour?
Yeah, I would say probably 7 o'clock.
See, I put this on a different time frame.
Yeah.
I remember early afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
Floyd?
Well, around 4 o'clock, I think it was, I got a phone call from the Washington Press. So evidently they knew that he was coming to Bethesda.
That would be 3 o'clock Dallas time.
Well, whatever, I don't know.
Mm.
It's up there. But they wanted to buy the photographs.
Are you sure the time is 4 o'clock?
It was roughly right at 4 o'clock, yeah, because I was getting ready to go to supper.
Paul, did you have any foreknowledge of when the body was coming in?
Only when Admiral Galloway came in.
Because see, they hadn't decided where that body was going to go until a certain point.
I just remember, it seemed to me, as I recollect, it was in the early afternoon sometime.
Let me ask them a question. Actually, you were leading up to it. So had you all done many autopsies with these physicians, the pathologists, the naval?
Not with Boswell or Humes.
Because see, that was another unique situation.
Yes.
Most of the autopsies that we did were basically performed one or two ways. We opened the body, took everything out. The resident came in, looked at it, and left. Or the resident, usually related to how long he'd been a resident, would come in, do the autopsy with us. Some of the other things I'd like to get into a little bit later on is how the autopsy was done, but it relates to another wound. I'd like to conclude.
Leading up to is, had you all or still had an opportunity to be with these pathologists, what was their reaction to doing an autopsy on this particular individual? I mean, do you recall anything that any comments, or could you see any emotional concern about what they were doing?
Relate to that.
See, Dr. Boswell and Dr. Humes were actually administrators. They were in an administrative position in the school, and they didn't do autopsies.
Right.
How many of them really had a lot of experience with head trauma?
I have no idea.
I was.
Who was the head pathologist?
Humes.
Pardon?
Hume. I mean, who was the one who normally did
The residents.
the residents?
Yeah, they're lieutenants, so junior grade officers.
What rank were these pathologists?
They were commanders.
He was a lieutenant commander.
And a commander. Humes was a commander. Boswell was lieutenant commander, and I'm not sure where,
Rose did it.
I think it was either a major or a lieutenant.
What
colonel.
struck me that night about the autopsy was the fact
At
that
that time?
Admiral Galloway, I mean not Admiral Galloway, but Admiral Berkeley, the president's physician,
He didn't have,
was driving us all up a wall.
In what respect?
Well, we'd start to do some sort of procedure like we usually do, and they'd say, don't do that, leave that alone. The Kennedy family doesn't want you touching that.
Did they take his adrenal glands, do you know?
took the adrenals, the testes, the pituitary, the thyroid.
Right.
All right, then, so if they took the thyroid, then they did explore this, but at no time did they say that this was a wound?
Dr. Boswell, the manner that we did the post was that we would open up the cavity, we would tie off the subclavians, the renals, and so forth, and then we would extract en masse by severing the trach at the highest point that we could actually reach. And then we take it all out, separate the organs, examine the organs by according to the technique that particular doctor would, whether he would sausage a heart or whether he would actually open up the heart through the vessels.
Did you do graduate work in pathology?
Yes.
Do you feel that there was anything peculiar about Dr. Humes and Dr. Boswell, Dr. Fink, who was not a Navy doctor, had been brought over, and Dr. Ebersol, do you feel that there was anything peculiar going on with regard to the investigation they were supposed to be conducting in view of what the later results were as in the form of the autopsy report and so on?
Again, I have to relate back to the conversations. When I left the morgue the next morning and went to Dr. Stover's, Captain Stover's office to receive the orders, I would have been 100% sure at that point in time that the fatal shot to the head came from the side, and that it came from here, at this angle. I was, as I said before, very surprised and almost to the point of being shocked of the conclusions that came out. There's still another wound that we haven't discussed here that, again, I think that we, I would like to ask questions and discuss.
Are you speaking of the back one?
Yes, the one in the back.
First, can I ask the naval photographer where that back wound, and show it to the camera, where that back wound is and how you know it?
Well, this is what appears to be the back wound, right down here.
How do you know that that's the back wound?
Well, it's
What
about
exhibit? That's Exhibit C.
it's about the right length down. It is kind of pickled inwards. The tissue pulled in, pushed in.
Did you
And
see
there
any
is a hole.
probing of that by the doctors or anyone?
Yes, I believe Colonel Fink and Dr. Boswell both had their finger. I know for a fact Colonel Fink had his finger in there. And
And that red spot up toward the shoulder line, could you point it out to the camera?
what's here?
Or that dark spot? What is that?
It could be a birthmark, a piece of dried blood, dirt.
You gentlemen, what do you feel that those are?
Well, I'm fairly certain. I don't really agree with him, and the fact is that this, to me, was approximately in the area where the wound was. And relating to that,
Could he have had two shots in the back?
not that I'm aware of. I think that, and the reason I say this is because it was almost at the edge of the scapula on the median line.
I remember it being just a little bit right of C7.
Yeah, maybe so. And I relate to it because as we had the organs out on the right middle lobe, on the middle lobe of the right lung, there was a small area that was bruised. I remember seeing Dr. Humes probe that wound with his finger. And again, too, I relate back to these things probably because of impressions. And I thought, well, his hands are extremely large to be doing something like that. They were trying to force an entry into the pleural cavity, and there was none. And you could actually see behind the pleura ridges as they probed into that area. And those ridges were going down. And as Paul says, they were probably down about the area of the middle lobe of the lung. There was never an entrance established into the pleural cavity. It was probed both with his finger and with the metal probe. And I remember that distinctly because I remember the impression of those that I saw from inside the body because the organs had been removed at that point in time. Now, whether they probed it prior to that, I'm not sure. Now, I also remember, sure.
Are you saying that whichever hole it is, that it did not penetrate the chest?
No, it did not.
It was a shallow wound.
It did not, yes. And it all seemed to be in the soft tissue. It almost was as if it was inside the rib cage. And because, as I said before, on seeing them probe it, there was no impression of the ribs or anything of that.
Did it look like a bullet hole to you?
Yes.
Looked like a punched,
Yeah.
like a bullet hole. Looks
Yeah,
like.
it looked like a bullet hole.
Couldn't have been cut with a scalpel
No.
or something.
No, no,
Somebody
no.
falsify a wound.
No.
No.
It was a traumatic wound, a traumatized area, and it looked as if, it looked as if it was a misfire or something of that nature that actually just did a puncture type
fell
wound
out.
and went down to a certain point. And when I first started hearing about the back wound and the bullet on the stretcher and things of that nature, I assumed that was the bullet that they had found.
And my assumption was, when I first saw that wound, that this was a through and through wound.
I'd like to point out that the
It's really
clothing,
too low.
both the coat and the jacket, the shirt, show bullet holes that are 6 inches below the shoulder line. This spot here is only an inch or so below the shoulder line.
Can I interject something here?
Let me finish
Okay.
this. I want to ask you, and then you can ask. Then what is this apparent deep hole way down here that's quite clearly 6 inches down on the back? See? What could this be in your medical opinion? Do you see this impression right here?
What happens to the body when the blood settles?
I agree.
Could be a scar of some kind.
That's my impression.
Or
It
something
looks
laying
like
on the stretcher that
there's
he was laying on.
some marks here.
Well, those
And
are
whether-
sheet marks from the sheets.
Right, whether that's a hole or whether it's just a deep part of a scar, I don't think
Yeah.
you can say.
If he had the back brace on, it could well have been.
Impressions
Uh,
on
He
earlier.
did have the back brace when
So
he came
that
in the
may well
emergency
be.
room.
In fact, when he was in the
Yeah.
emergency
It's not a
room,
hole
he had a
necessarily.
back brace
No,
on.
to me, it seems to be a scar also. But I do remember that this was, the scapula comes across in this area, and it was right basically in the medial line, even with, or a little bit low, the top of the scapula. And as I said, when it was probed inside the scapula and inside the rib cage.
But you're convinced it simply did not go anywhere. It did not.
No, because
Could it have come out the throat?
no, I don't think so, because
That's what I thought,
That what?
that it came out the throat.
yeah.
I dissociate that.
Let me ask you, when they were examining, there were x-rays taken throughout the autopsy, and there was discussions by the doctors looking at the, first of all, they were taking the x-rays to try to determine if there were any metal fragments anywhere in the head, or where was the bullet. They were trying to find the bullets. So they were continually taking x-rays, running up, developing them. Jerry Custer would run back with them and show them to the doctors. Do you recall at any time during their examinations of these x-rays seeing metal fragments or slugs or bullets or anything?
No. As a matter of fact, there was some controversy about it that ultimately brought the radiologist down.
Ever saw? Or,
I'm not sure. The controversy. See, one of the things that was going on at that time, then
you remember, no, excuse me, any metal in the neck at all in an x-ray?
the only metal.
Excuse me, it came up later, 4 years later, when these photographs and x-rays were examined by a panel of doctors, and two of them in Baltimore, that there were metal fragments in the throat, but this was not noted in the autopsy report, and it was not in any other evidence. There was a slug on the outer table of the skull, a half an inch from this alleged entry hole in the colic. In your medical experience, has there ever been a case of a bullet, in this case it was a cross-section of a bullet, a half of a bullet, stuck in the skull here? Have you ever heard of something like that happening anywhere near an entrance hole? I'm going to tell you, we have a description from one of the people at the autopsy of being asked the next day to tape metal fragments to pieces of bone and taking x-rays of them, and then we believe that that's how these composite x-rays were taken.
Where did you get the metal fragments?
Well, they claimed that they were from President Kennedy, but were there, do you remember any bullets being found? Or
There were none found in the body, and as I said, that created quite a controversy, both from the gallery and from the floor. We did receive...
Removed the fragments at surgery from Governor Connolly. Of quote, that one bullet that was supposed to have made so many flips.
See,
in the
we
Did you
ground.
draw a
Christine
picture
book.
of the size of those? Do you remember the size of those?
I tell you, I don't know. We had them in a medicine glass.
Yeah, I don't remember the size.
Do you know what they weighed?
We didn't weigh them because they were taken by
Yeah.
FBI. Or
See, we received bullet fragments and bone fragments in a small
It's about
baggie
the
type.
bottom of that medicine glass.
Mhm.
Did
And
you
it,
see them?
you know,
that
they
I
way?
saw 'em,
they
but I
were
don't
metal
remember
fragments that,
what they
which
They
were
were
related to
kinda
being.
In the brain?
No, it was not inside the body. They brought them to us in a bag,
Metal
and
fragments.
yeah, and I remember that the
They
bag
pretty
was
well
placed
covered the bottom of
by
that,
the head
if I'm
at
not
the top of the
I
autopsy
just
table.
don't really have a recollection. I
There were
remember,
Some of the
you know,
some of the
that
fragments, the
being
bone
some,
fragments,
but
were
I
the ones
don't
that
remember the
they tried to
details.
place into
Well,
the.
then-
All right,
of course, you know,
we
chips left.
want to just have one person talking at one time. So,
We were trying to,
okay,
it's been so long, trying to recreate the,
the metal fragments.
they were collected in a glass,
Yeah.
medicine glass, which had diameter.
How many would you say there were?
There were between 4 and 5, could have been 6 fragments, but they fairly well covered the bottom of that
Yeah.
glass.
You've seen pictures of the commission exhibit 399, the magic bullet, so-called. You know the bullet I'm speaking of.
I think we had too much to
Yeah.
go on to the magic bullet.
Whether or not any part of it could have come from, I have it somewhere, from that bullet.
Mr. Livingston,
Yes.
I had one question that we were just talking about during the break, and I'm a little confused. I would like to hear you sort of come together with your description of the brain. I got a little bit of a different impression from each one of you as to how much brain was left in the skull, and other, general descriptions of it. If it would be helpful to me to have you two come to an agreement as to what you saw.
Again, too, is I think that's been one of the controversies.
Right.
Is the difference between Paul's observation and description and my own. I can't reconcile it. I don't really know where the discrepancy came. I know that the description of the wound can basically be rationalized by the fact is that it was an open, gaping wound, had a lot of tissue, a lot of hair, a lot of blood. I do remember, as I said before, the brain and the impressions that I have of the brain. I think that if I had received, or if I had, had worked with a brain that was of that, with destruction of that magnitude, that first of all, we would have not been able to infuse it because a third of the brain, along with the cerebellum, would have caused such massive destruction of the bottom of the brain that the vessels that we normally use for infusion would have been impossible to use. We did have difficulties with them, but the difficulties that we had were primarily because they had retracted and had shrunk to a certain point, which is primarily what happens to a vessel when it's severed. Again, too, is I think that we have to say this, that this is perception on two individual parts. I don't know that either one of us is correct or either one of us is wrong. I think that that's basically what we said. I don't feel like the brain weighed 1,500 grams.
Is that what the autopsy report stated that it weighed?
Well,
That's-
that was a comment that you made earlier.
Yes, it states that.
I think it was probably smaller than that.
And you wouldn't think that it weighed that much
No.
either.
My first impression, I was right there by the skull when they took the sheet off, and I remember looking into the cavity of the brain.
That's
and
what I
saying,
saw.
Good God, look what's missing.
That's what I saw, nothing there.
Nothing.
Do you recall anybody saying, as they began to examine the body at 8 o'clock or whenever, before they made any incisions, there is surgery to the head area,
Yes.
I've heard that for years.
mainly to the top of the head? Well, that's what the FBI men wrote down. Were they writing down what was being said by the doctors? Or?
They were writing down what was being discussed between Dr. Humes and Dr. Boswell at the time they started taking the brain out of the cavity.
Could this be surgery here?
Well, let me let the neurosurgeon look at that.
Could all this be surgery?
No, right down in the temple area there, or
The bottom
that
part.
circle. And anywhere in that area, could there be evidence of surgery? I regret that it's not a...
It's hard to really, it's not well defined there, but it doesn't look like there's anything.
Yeah.
right
I
there.
point out that the FBI report states that there was, quote, surgery to the head area. And you recall the doctor saying
Yeah,
this?
there was a statement to that effect, or a discussion to that effect between Dr. Humes and Dr. Boswell, and I thought that it related primarily to the brainstem. And later in
But the
the
rest of the statement, excuse me, says mainly to the top of the head.
okay, well, see, the other thing that I observed was that, as Paul says, we normally did a skull cap to remove the brain. It wasn't necessary. There was an extension of the sagittal, I think it's the sagittal suture, that going through the
Could
area.
you show the sagittal suture?
Primarily, it's a midline suture that connects the parietal bone,
The front to the back of
the top
Yeah.
of the head, you know.
Okay.
What I recollect is that there was a massive comminution of the skull. It's very
Certainly
manipulative.
looks like a skull x-ray of a massive comminution.
Yeah,
Well,
But the way
But
the
it's-
wound has been described here,
would
and
be in
from
the
what I
back.
was told,
Totally.
I would not say this is the same skull.
No.
Not the
No,
same
because
skull.
It
see,
can't be.
the only thing that related to the front of the skull was that apparently there was a hairline crack in the vomer area that caused some problems when they were trying to close the eye after the cosmetic end of it, and it wasn't really, to me, it wasn't noticeable. But you know, they were suturing the lid down and things of that nature, and they were saying, well, it's not exactly right. The other question I have, and I'd like to direct it to Dr. Williams, is the fact in the statement, and as I said, I recently read the Warren Commission report. I had taken it out of our library. There was a statement that said that there was an incision running fore and aft in the brain to the level of the corpus callosum. And it was a surgical incision. My question is, you know, do
Where
you
was
have-
that statement? In the,
I
autopsy?
it was in, I think it was Dr. Humes' statement in his description of the brain. You know, what would have been the implications? I mean, I'm asking for opinion.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
that's far frontal as far as,
Yes, very
you know, in
much
relation to the cerebellum, where I'd always heard that the injury was. And if it was an incision, is that the way they described it?
Yes, they described it as a surgical incision to the depth of the corpus.
Well, then that means it's been up at this area up here,
Yes.
and that's, you know, as far as I know, nothing was done at Parkland to involve that area of the head or the brain itself.
Could you demonstrate that again for the camera, what we're talking about here? You said that there's a statement by Dr. Humes that there's a,
Surgical incision,
and
Uh-huh.
place it on your head.
that there was a surgical incision in the brain.
We
Now-
have a drawing here.
Okay. That, now, the reason I asked Dr. Williams is because, you know, I was may I see that? Thank you. Is that we, you know, I couldn't see any purpose for this, and I was wondering if I was misinterpreting the statement that was made. This is an area of the brain, and please correct me if I think Dr. Williams probably more capable of doing this, but there was what had been an incision starting at the top of the brain down to the level of this area here. And my understanding that it extended forward toward the right eye.
Frontal lobe.
Well, the frontal lobe would have been in this area, but it wasn't so much restricted to any area in the cerebellum, but at more or less at the depth. You know, my impression was that it extended from approximately the front of the brain to back to the area where
The large defect one?
yeah, where the trauma was, and that I remember the statement saying that it was at the depth of the corpus callosum, which would have been here.
All right, so you remember them saying this at the table?
No, I remember that from reading the
Okay.
autopsy report.
All right, and could this relate to the statement there is surgery to the head area, mainly to the top of the head?
I really honestly can't answer that because, to be honest with you, I didn't notice this type of surgery to
Could
the
it have been the
brain
track
that was
of a
handled.
bullet going through there?
Again, that would be speculation on my part.
Well, it could be, possibly, but it certainly wouldn't be a smooth line like an incision, if that's the way it was described.
May I ask a question? Could it possibly have been that a bullet was removed by that technique? That maybe that a bullet had been removed actually from the brain and through the tract that was apparently made?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
possible.
Is there any other explanation for it?
The bullet's certainly an incriminating piece of evidence.
Yeah. You know, and relating that back to the fact is that we actually found no metal in the body
At all?
at all.
Fragments?
The only fragments of bullets that I saw came to us by someone in a suit, and I assumed that he was either Secret Service, FBI, so forth. It was
When did
in
you
a
get him?
small. It was in a small bag type thing, almost like a Ziploc.
When did you
Let's
get
see your
them?
drawing.
During the
See if they
autopsy.
recognize this.
No, I don't.
How accurate is this
Oh.
drawing, Audrey?
Were x-rays taken in the autopsy room?
Do you recognize?
Yes, there was
How
quite a
about
few.
large slugs, as show in the X-rays on the inside
No.
of the
No.
of
No,
the forehead?
they were all
there's
fragments.
a semicircle, half of a bullet. Can I see that?
No, they were all fragments,
Okay.
small fragments.
Did any of this look?
In relation to size, if that is really close to being the size,
See this
yes.
bright white thing right here? That is a bullet embedded in the skull. They've cut this off here, but the description by the Clark panel where the circle is, there's a semicircle of a bullet in the outer table of the skull. Well, it's up here by the colic, and this is another one that's embedded in the inside of the forehead.
Okay, if this is the case, then this would have been about the level, and I'd like for Dr. Williams to concur as a neurologist, but it should have been about the level of the incision as far as depth
Here,
from front to back.
in the X-ray, there is a semicircle which looks like a cross-section of a bullet. The Clark panel found that their examination of the X-rays by Dr. Russell Fisher, the medical examiner of Maryland, and the Dr. Russell Morgan of Johns Hopkins and two other doctors, they found that there were two large, in other words, basically halves of bullets, cross-sections. One of them was embedded on the outer table of the skull here, 1/2 inch from the alleged entry wound, which was not seen at the autopsy or documented, but it shows up in the X-rays, and these photographs would apparently, we think it was drawn in this little entry wound. But how could there's supposed to be a bullet here stuck into the skull, and then inside of the forehead there's another half of a bullet inside of the forehead. Would this have been seen at the autopsy?
Well, it was not seen at the autopsy.
No.
I know because the X-rays. This X-ray, if in fact this is a bullet, and it is embedded behind the eye orbit, approximately is, if I'm reading this correctly, is where it would have been. This was not done at Bethesda.
Well, we have I regret that Jerry Custer, the X-ray tech, is here, but go ahead.
Dr. Boswell and I examined the rear of this orbit, the right orbit, and it was fractured. And the eye was pushed out of the orbit just a little bit. And the vomer was fractured too, that's what we noticed.
Would that have anything to do with that surgery or that?
We stopped there to change tape.
Yeah, 'cause I think the surgery would have been related to that
Okay.
photograph. Approximately at the base of the cranium, and the fracture that was behind here in the vomer area, with sudden expansion or contraction of this, and the damage actually caused a hairline crack in the base. And, and that was my impression. That was the reason I felt like that.
What did he mean, Boswell, by this 3 centimeter mark on the over the right eye here, left eye?
I don't know. That's this area.
I don't understand
I
that.
don't understand this drawing either.
Do you want to proceed? Or
Well, we
wait
just
for
finished.
Officer to come back? She went to the restroom.
We can wait a second. She'll be right back. Then we can finish.
See, this drawing is, I can't relate to that drawing at all because everything is backwards. If we're looking down on the crown of the head, everything's
Can we
wrong
sit down?
side.
All right, we'll mention that. Could you repeat again what you just explained about that, on that head there? You're rolling?
Again, I think it, again,
That X-ray doesn't look
We
anything
want
like
to
that.
wait for Audrey to come back.
No, that's,
She's 1 second.
this actually,
This can't be resolved.
in reality, is a gaping wound, okay?
Where'd all these pictures
Is there anything wrong
of
with
the
that
brain
picture?
come
No,
from, Harry?
this actually shows tissue. And
National
hair and
Archives, I would
so forth.
imagine.
But you could actually take this hair and when we
Lift
had
it up.
those are the
when we had
ones
it
that
had,
like
it
they
was-
showed me when I went up there.
uh,
I don't know what
We're
that
done.
thing
I don't know.
is.
But when we took the towels off, the wound was gaping, and the people had looked at the wound prior to us taking the towels off. And again, interest. The people who went in initially were Paul and I into the thing to prepare the jars for samples and things of that nature. And I think he also was our doctor,
Who was it now?
first class, whatever his name was.
Yeah.
And, and we took the sheets off, and we took the sheets off of that, and then we were told not to take the towels or unwrap the head. We had already taken the sheet off the head at that point in time. And there were people who were lifting up the towel in a certain way and looking. And from that aspect, it looked like there was a gaping, large hole with nothing there. It was similar.
No scalp? No.
No, nothing. It looked like a hole similar to this.
Okay, but how about all
Where
this
was the
reflective
brain? Now,
scalp
there
hair?
was brain inside the cranium, wasn't there?
Yes, there was.
And you
there was
removed
a
that brain.
Dr. Humes actually removed the brain.
Okay,
You
but
have to
this
see him
large-
cut the brain stem
Well,
in order to remove the brain?
He didn't cut the
You
brain.
didn't have
Okay,
to.
let's, you've got to catch this. This is really.
In other words, that was a free
They're doing their
floating
best
brain
talking
inside the
now.
cranium, is that what you're saying?
So you're saying what?
It didn't leave Parkland as a free floating brain to the bottom.
All right. Okay. Roll them.
There was brain inside the cranium when
Oh, yeah.
He was still there.
Yeah, he was
Saying a large gaping hole, but that means no scalp.
No. The gaping hole means that everything was reflected back to where there was a large gaping hole.
All right. So the scalp was reflected back when you got it.
Yeah, all of the tissue, the damaged tissue and so forth, was reflected back to the point that it looked like, to me, my impression was that
We have to pick this up from the top.
All right.
To establish what you want to establish.
All right. Jim, when you received the body and people were peering under the towel, looking at the head, and you first saw the head, what did you see?
well, I think before we unwrapped the head, just by taking and lifting and peeking, it seemed as if there was a extremely large gaping hole in the cranium, and as Paul said, wasn't much of the brain that you could view.
And the hole was basically in this area here.
In the same area, yes.
Now, was the scalp present or reflected back? Or?
Well, the scalp was kind of reflected back in areas. Now, not in reflected back in the sense that you would pick it up and turn it back, but it was, it was almost as if,
Just peel back.
yeah, and that
That somebody, rather than, you don't feel that a gunshot could have done that, do you?
I don't think so.
My
other words-
first impression is that a bomb went off the side of his head. That's what my first
Well, but
impression.
when you say that the scalp was peeled back or reflected back, in other words, you're indicating that somebody did that to it before you saw it,
I'm not sure that that's.
rather than a gunshot would have
Yeah.
done this.
I'm not sure that that's the case. I think that probably what happened in transporting it, apparently, when the body was prepared and so forth, there was no conscientious effort made to bring all the scalp back into point. I think that was what we were seeing. I think, and I don't remember prior to that, but the only conscientious effort that I saw was at the preparation of the body for burial to bring all of this tissue back into one mass and, to reshape the head. And at that point in time, there was certain parts missing. And at that point in time, the pathologist actually tried to fit some of the bone fragments to this area. They were not very successful. And again,
Were they plastered into place at the end?
the bones?
The
No.
pieces?
No, they were kept.
So in other words, the head would still show that large defect today.
It would still have the defect, but it would be cosmetically.
All right.
Okay,
See, he had so much hair that
Yes.
they were able
Yeah.
to comb the hair back
But the
over
plaster
the defect.
inside the bone would still be missing. In other words, well, we could see what would be.
Well, basically, yeah, the plaster, what the plaster would do for him is it said it would allow them to mold the head. And these fragments, the bones would still be fragmented and so forth, but they would have probably adhered to the plaster and, and formed a fairly uniform cranium.
Could you look at these two drawings of Dr. Boswell's that were done at the autopsy and say how accurate they are? What do they mean?
This one is confusing. To be honest with you, as I look at this, and if I'm looking
This
from...
drawing right here.
Okay. I'm not sure of what 3 millimeters over the left eye is. I'm not sure of what...
Centimeters, 3
Or
centimeters.
centimeters. I'm not sure of what the missing means. They seem to be almost inverted as far as the wounds depicted and things of this nature. I really don't know what to make of these. I have never been able to orientate to them.
Did he do autopsies routinely, this particular doctor?
No.
Do you know what these, in the other drawing here, showing the full body, do you know what these arrows pointing to each eye, what's written there, what does that mean?
I know what the numbers are because that's my handwriting.
You wrote
Okay.
that in? You wrote everything in here?
Most of it, except the description and so forth, Dr. Boswell did. This ragged, so forth. This one, where we did the initial.
On the left side.
Yeah. Well, actually, this is related to the frontal area of the body, and this was a preliminary to all the autopsies. Dr. Boswell dictated a lot of this. He measured the wound in the neck.
What do these pointing to both eyes? There's a circle drawn around the right eye. There's a line drawn to the left eye.
I think my impression is that that's the dilation structure of the eye itself.
All right.
You know,
this statement here on B, pointing to basically the occipital protuberance, it would appear, but
I don't really.
says what, ragged?
It looks like I can't.
And did you write that?
No, I did not write that.
Okay, where we have is this a wound here in the back?
Yes,
What does it say, 7 by?
by 4 millimeters.
Did you write that?
No, I didn't.
So does this indicate a wound in the back, 7 by 4 millimeters?
Yes. And,
Can you read what it says directly under that?
It says 14 centimeters from the right acromion.
Acromial process?
Process 14 centimeters below. I don't know
Does
what
that square, he's orienting the bullet apparently, the wound, to some anatomical reference point.
Yeah.
Does this square with your memory of that hole in the back at all?
I would have to, think about it anatomically.
How about you, Paul? Because Boswell, there was a major article in the Baltimore Sun where he then retracted everything that's in these drawings.
Pieces of
can
paper
say,
come
really.
from.
These,
it looks like
this
it's
is,
about the
they
way
actually
it's
have
got-
bloodstains all over them, but he
Which
drew
is where
this
the
at the
bullet
autopsy.
That's where it was.
No, I'm talking about what publication did that come from? Is that
This
from
is
the Warren
from my
Commission?
book.
From your book?
Well, they're right here in this, the publication of the Assassinations Committee, and I think they were reproduced in the Warren Report. Yeah, here it is. This is from the House of Representatives, and there's the drawings.
Is that still available?
It's from the Warren, you cannot get this book. It says for the use of the House Assassinations.
Well, it was never made
Committee.
available to the public?
No, but I have sent it to Dr. McClellan. I had some extra copies that the congressman gave me that I was working with, and there are several copies of Parkland that I got in there. I hope you have that
Yeah.
book still. This book, volume 7 of the.
Yes.
Good. So, Dr. Williams, you can see that. Anything else to say about these drawings?
No, again, if I can read well, these are the weights, so forth that were given, that were given to me by Dr.
Do
Boswell.
you see the brain weight on there?
No,
Oh, that was a supplemental report.
no.
Now, well, before the break, you were demonstrating an apparent shot from here and how that related to this, quote, surgery to the head area and this, what was it, the severance of the,
Of the brainstem.
well, no, there was
Oh.
another
Okay,
cut.
there was a
And what kind of bullet might have done this?
fracture actually in the vomer process behind the orbit here, in the base of the cranium. In other words, the base that the skull sits on that has the pituitary and so forth. And again, and this again is my impression and supposition is that relating back to the conversation of this area, there was some gray, I hesitate to describe it as metallic area approximately the size of the end of my finger in this area.
It could have been from scraping from a bullet or something?
That was my impression, and that was the
Sounds like
discussion.
lead.
That was the discussion between Dr. Fink and Dr. Humes.
Did you point at that area again?
It's primarily in this area, maybe a little lower. My question to Dr. McClellan and so forth, and Dr. Williams was,
You want to show them again?
with the impact of a high velocity bullet at that point in time, and with the damage that was created here to the cranium, was the distortion such that it could have created the hairline fracture in the vomer? And I guess as we all have to say, we're again dealing in possibilities and probabilities here. And as Dr. McClellan answered, it is a possibility. This was the reason. This is one of the primary reasons that I was surprised at the results from the autopsy. The other one, consequently, was the wound in the back that I saw probed. And it was not related at all to the wound in the front.
The Warren Commission say there was just one shot? You have to refresh my...
I don't remember. I think there was supposed to be a one-bullet theory, but I'm not sure that it ruled out
For the head or the?
For the head. All right.
No, they just claim that one bullet struck the head from behind, but the films and other evidence indicates that it was probably hit twice,
Yeah.
possibly from both front and behind in the same moment. He
He
seems to be going forward suddenly
and then up.
and then backwards.
Yeah.
He's rocketing backwards.
Yeah. It seems.
You think the first shot was in the neck, and then he went forward, and then maybe he was hitting the back of the head then?
I'll tell you what I think from having watched the films, I think he might have been hit from the back, went forward, leaned over a little bit, and then was struck sort of tangentially in the side of the head.
That's what it looked
Back
like.
of the head blew out, and somewhere in here, probably hidden or missing, is an entrance wound. And then it came across the head tangentially and blew out the brain.
Slow
I agree.
motion shows
So the
the
first-
brain tissue
Does anybody
going
notice anything?
backwards.
Right.
The first
right.
shot entered where, though, Bob?
I think it probably entered here, and the bullet probably coursed sort of tangentially, or obliquely rather, through the head and came out the back here.
Back to the occipital.
Right, blew everything out here, and the witnesses saw the back of his head exploding.
Yeah.
It shows on the camera. And you have to ask, well, where was the entrance wound for this? And there's no good answer to that in my mind, except to say that it's probably somewhere in the edge of this defect up
Yeah.
here.
I think the entrance wound, according to, as I said, and I'm going on the impression from the grade area, would have been in this area. And
In other words,
that
it
would,
looked like lead scraped onto the
bone.
Right, and that'd
And
be where
see,
the
I
bullet
think
struck.
that probably this was the original exit wound.
Mhm.
And see, the other thing that I can't
It was
really
probably blown away by the
Yeah.
second bullet.
put together is that somehow Dr. Humes indicated that there, and correct me if I'm wrong, because again, like I said, that there was another bullet wound lower. There were two here.
He's saying that there was an entry wound. The autopsy report states that it's at or near the occipital.
Right here?
Actually, the
Yeah, right
autopsy
here.
report places it as a half an inch or so from it
That might
to
be
the
a
occipital
fragment,
protuberance.
might be a fragment from a large
yeah.
bullet.
No, he said it was an entrance wound. And he stated that it was beveled on the inside of the skull,
Okay.
and therefore had to be an entrance wound.
Can
I
I
don't
make-
think you can say that.
Can I make a statement to
You
that
can have
effect?
an opinion
Then it
about
moved
whether
4
it's an
inches up
entrance
to the
wound,
collar.
Yeah.
but I don't think you can
The,
say
uh,
for sure it is.
We did not have either the capabilities that I'm aware of ascertaining any basic forensic pathology, okay? I also read, as I said, of the cupping.
But did those capabilities exist in the Washington, Baltimore area?
Yes, they did, at the Institute of Pathology downtown.
And how far was that from Bethesda?
That was,
That was on Alaska Avenue.
something, and see, and my impression was that's where Dr. Fink came from.
Armed Forces Institute of
Right.
Pathology.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Would
Armed
you
Forces.
feel that he was competent to
I'm not competent to judge him.
but do you feel that they had, you needed scientific instruments or something that were not available at?
Well, I don't think that the detailed examination was such that they would have noticed, certainly in the area that they're talking about, because in the area we're talking about, as we have stated before, there was a maceration again, I'm using the word, but it doesn't really apply. There was a fragmentation of the bone attached to scalp. There was hair. There was blood and so forth. So making an assumption or an opinion on where the entrance wound would have been back there, as Dr. McClellan said, would have been it would not have been possible.
I would like to pass.
That's all I would do.
Again, and again, too, you're correct. This is all in my opinion.
No, I mean, not your opinion. I agree with what you're
Yeah.
saying. I think that it would have been his opinion that this was an entrance wound. It could have just as readily. I don't think you could make a fine judgment with that much tissue injury about, well, it's beveled in a certain way. That
Right.
I don't think that there was that much bone
Meaningless.
available in a
Right,
single piece
right.
around this area, the one that we ultimately described as being small, $50 or
Tell me
as Paul
something.
said.
After the Warren report was issued, it was stated, well, all the Parkland doctors were mistaken. The hole wasn't in the back of the head. There was an entrance hole there, but they made a mistake, right? And they were not competent. It's absurd. Did I hear you correctly? All right. Now, the autopsy report placed an entrance hole at or near the occipital protuberance in the back of the head, and then 3 or 4 years later, when all this material was reviewed by the Clark panel, that wound had moved 4 inches. Is it possible that the autopsy doctors had made a mistake, as the House committee later said, that they made a mistake of 4 inches?
Again, we can only speculate, but if you look at this photograph, and this is an involvement of the occipital, the parietal, the temporal area, and even if it was moved down, from relating to this photograph and the photograph here, can we realistically say that a decision could have been made? Could you actually have found a hole in a piece of bone and determine if it was cupped inward or outward, that type of thing.
May I see that?
Sure.
Let me pass this picture back and forth and ask you if, I know what one of you already thinks, and I've also, state police homicide investigator in the state of Maryland, examined one of these, some of these pictures, and he found something else wrong with them. So I'm going to pass this and ask you if you see anything wrong with this picture, Paul. Start with Paul and then.
What strikes me about this picture
This is exhibit.
is it looks like that this
Exhibit D.
D,
D.
this area here looks like it's been brushed out.
You see this?
Yes.
And the wound here looks like it's painted on to me.
Yeah, but
Now, I'm not a photographic expert, but
All right, but the
I
forehead-
remember a more three-dimensional wound in this area here.
Well, you see it in the
But
side
you're seeing,
view.
I know what you're seeing, but it just doesn't conform
Paul, we're
with
talking
this
about
part of the
the-
anatomy right there.
Paul, we're talking about the forehead.
Well,
We're talking about a possible entrance wound in the forehead.
right there.
Did you see anything at the autopsy that?
Absolutely not.
No.
No.
This doesn't look like the morgue either.
That's true. It does not look like the morgue.
We didn't have anything
What?
wooden in there.
Does not look like the morgue. The morgue would,
Just noticed that
What?
before. No.
no, does not look like the
This-
morgue.
What did the floor look like in the at Bethesda?
Well, it was similar in design, but it was white.
Yeah, and
Plus,
There were no little tile squares, or?
Yeah, there were small
Is that a tile floor?
squares. This appears to be a tile type floor, be tile or linoleum, but the one at Bethesda was stone tile.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it was
Yeah.
put in there so it
What
was
did it
going
look
to
like?
last
What
for
color
years.
was it? It was white.
White
Easy to
and
clean, too.
black.
But there were no little dots there. No little.
Oh yeah, they had, I believe there was some dots around for design to break up a solid color, but it's
Yeah.
this area here.
it does
Right.
not exist in that morgue.
It does not.
This
We have no
area
wooden
here
structures
would have
in the
been
morgue.
steps going up to a gallery.
Right,
Right.
that's what it would have been. And the gallery would have extended to the top of the head of the table. And
What do you suppose that is then?
We have no idea.
In some other room?
Tissue.
I don't, well, not in the morgue.
We just don't know.
See,
That's not your picture.
that's not the picture of the
No,
morgue.
they
This
can't
could
be.
could this be at Parkland anywhere?
No, because you got that same kind of tile that we don't have at Parkland.
Yeah, that's a military towel underneath there.
But
It
that
has a
floor,
caduceus on it.
doesn't look familiar to you?
Doesn't look
They
familiar to
didn't
me.
stop to take
Trauma room?
pictures,
No, I don't think.
There's a story that the Secret Service went in and took pictures of the body.
This looks like,
You know,
Tile here.
what I'm
That's
wondering,
tile
is this the skull from somebody that was used to make those x-rays?
That's,
Yeah.
could be.
We
We
think
don't
I
know
think
that.
somebody
that's
else
what
We do
this
not know
is.
that's the
I think
president's
this
skull.
is somebody else. This right here could be even the edge of a ball peen hammer. We're talking
Yes.
about the hammer.
Yeah.
See, also here, in this area,
You want to show this to the camera, please?
this is an area.
Okay, and what's this? You're talking about this right here?
did he have a trach in place when he left the Parkland? The trach tube was removed?
Okay,
So
where
he
you
arrived just
say
like
this might be a
No,
hole in here?
Well, the trach
now what
tubes is
I'm
there.
talking about is that could I see those x-rays? And this is rather tenuous, admittedly. But in these x-rays that show defects in the front part, the anterior part of the skull, when all of us saw defects back here,
Right.
both at Bethesda and at Parkland, all of us, every one of us. And we made those statements independent of one another, not in a
true.
group. So this was fabricated from something. Now what I'm wondering about, as I've sat here and thought about it, is this the skull of another body? And the skull had been deformed in some way. This circular part here, we were talking about the phone call from the doctor who said he saw a head being attacked with a hammer.
Yes.
That could be possibly a defect from a ball peen hammer. That
And we don't know whose head it was.
no, we don't know whose head that is, but
But I mean,
that's
do we know whose
the
head?
anterior part of the skull. This is the posterior part. The neck is here, and this is the skull that was used to make these x-rays. That's my supposition.
Which part of the skull is the anterior, posterior?
I think this is the anterior part,
Right.
and this is the posterior
Posterior,
part here.
right.
Yeah.
The
Looks
back
like the
part of the
occipital
skull.
protuberance.
Right.
Were any of the autopsy materials or any of the evidence ever brought to the AFIP,
Which is,
Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, which is, I think, it's on Walter Reed
It's at Walter Reed
campus?
We don't see, the thing is that we don't really know where the brain went.
right, but how about the
Because, I mean, that's-
pathology slides that are all missing from the National Archives?
There were tissue samples taken from all organs,
Right.
including the bruise to the lung.
To lung.
There were, as I said, the testes were taken, and I don't know if I should discuss that on here, but all of the endocrine glands
I don't
that
think we
were
have anything to
accessible,
hide here.
that was accessible, were taken. Pituitary, the thyroid, again, as I mentioned, the testes were removed.
And where did these samples go?
Well, they were put as general principle in a labeled bottle. Some sections were made. The heart itself was opened up. There were comments about how pink the lungs were. There was a comment about did he smoke, and one of the doctors says, well, I think he smokes occasional cigar. There were Dr. Humes was the one that opened the intestinal tract, or the lower GI tract, and cleaned it and looked, basically for ulcers, things of that nature. That normally was our job, but I remember him doing it, basically because everybody tried to, Paul and I got assigned that because no one else wanted to do it. You open up the intestines.
Strip the intestines.
And clean the intestines and observe the wall. I think that, I know that there were samples taken because the autopsy procedure did not deviate in the remainder of the autopsy. We did it basically the way that we had done it before. The only organs that I remember being returned to the body were actually the intestines that were cut up in small strips and put into the body by the mortician with a plaster that he used to form the body with. I also know that my observation was that the body looked better after he finished, as far as musculature and so forth, than prior to the time that he did that.
More robust.
These
Yeah.
pictures, is this John Kennedy in these pictures? Is it John
It
Kennedy,
appears
first
to be
of all?
John Kennedy.
Yeah, to me it appears to be.
And this is the way you remember his face. I think we've been through this. Okay.
Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, they have a very fine neuropathologist there, Dr. Kenneth Earl. And I was wondering whether he was ever consulted about this or even interviewed by.
I think so.
See,
And I would think, Bethesda being a naval hospital, a military hospital, that the AFIP would have been involved in
Do you
this.
think something was being covered up in that
Well, that
autopsy? In
didn't-
the autopsy itself?
I'm not sure that anything was being covered. I think that certainly things were being controlled because reflecting back to some of the relationship between the people in the gallery and the people on the floor, getting back to the back wound, when they could not probe the back wound to the front of the body, there were some animosities that came out of the gallery as primarily indicating you don't really know what you're doing.
You mean somebody wanted that wound to come out somewhere
Yes.
in the front?
My impression was that somebody wanted the wound in the back to come out the front. Now, if you remember back, we did not know that was a bullet wound. We thought, and I think all of the doctors there have made the same statement, we assumed that was a trach. Now, these wounds are similar to what I saw, except what I saw was a cleaner surgical incision on both sides. One of the questions I had that I brought today was, how long did the trach tube stay in? Did it stay in long enough for the body to start the rigor mortis
You mean
to
it
set
was
in?
taken out before you got it? It wasn't in when you got
No,
it?
it was not here.
Yeah.
No, it was not there.
Yeah,
Okay.
very short
'Cause
time.
it-
Rob, did you actually see the neck wound prior to any
No.
surgical?
No.
It was already.
They had already enlarged the
What's,
wound.
what's Mac
when I got-
Perry and Charlie say about that?
Well, Mac said that it looked like an entrance wound to him. The initial small hole that he enlarged to make the tracheostomy, he said looked like an entrance wound. And one of the doctors from Bethesda, I remember we officed together, the next afternoon called Malcolm and talked to him about the wound in the neck.
I think
And I
it was
remember
Dr.
hearing
Hughes.
Malcolm,
Hughes, yeah.
I believe it was, yeah, I had forgotten. And they discussed that and the nature of the wound at that time.
The wound actually looked as if, you know, they had made one long incision, and that the trach tube had been inserted approximately in the middle of the wound, and that it had stayed there long enough to traumatize the area and to create an impression. To be honest, at that point in time, I don't think anyone in the morgue really reflected back on this wound as being anything but a trach. And it was not until later on that I became aware that supposedly there was a entrance wound there, as far as the Parkland doctors had seen. I do know that watching the probing of the wound in the back, that they could not probe it forward, that it only went down.
Well, Dr. Fink testified to that in New Orleans, that it did not go in any farther than this.
Yes, and I think,
Would you demonstrate? I don't
Okay.
want to tell you how far.
Well,
it went,
what I saw was, and they were probing the wound from the back of the body. The body was raised. There were no organs in the pleural cavity at all, or in the body at that point in time. We had taken them all out. I saw Dr. Humes' finger, the impression of his finger going down the inside behind the pleural without penetrating in, to the point that his finger would go.
You were looking Exhibit F,
Okay.
and you folks tell us, where is this room?
Okay. I assume this one looks as if it's in the morgue at Bethesda. The only discrepancy I find in it is the metal support that is supporting the head at this time. As Paul says, we had a chock. It was a block that was approximately 6 inches long, that had 4 prongs, and it could be turned.
Turned to different sizes
Yeah.
to raise or lower the head.
And it was more or less matched directly behind the neck, as opposed to being back into this area
Was
of
it-
the cranium.
Attached to the table, would it have
No.
to show in a photograph?
It was, yeah, it would have had to show if it was there.
Well, couldn't it simply have been removed here?
I'm not sure, again, too, is I can't definitely say that this was not available on the table, but I know that I don't
All right, but
remember it ever being used.
This support,
To the table,
That
doesn't it?
attaches to the table,
This
but I
part.
just don't remember that.
I don't ever
I don't
remember
remember
it
our
being-
table had
okay,
attachment.
you want
like
to
that.
point at what you don't remember here?
Okay, I don't remember. There is a support that comes from the top of the table, attached to the table, that comes up and supports the head area.
Was that ever used in your?
In the
memory?
autopsies that I worked with at Bethesda,
No.
no, we never used it.
Floyd, what do you recall about this issue? When you were taking, did you take that picture?
I believe so, yes. And I think this was taken in the autopsy room.
I think so too.
But how about that brace?
I really didn't pay that much attention to the
Yeah.
brace.
So what could this mean, this anomaly here about the chalk?
I don't know. Sometimes looking at some of these things, I get the impression that they were taken either earlier or later.
In the evening?
I'm fairly sure they weren't taken
I just
earlier,
think that's dumb.
and I don't see how they could have been taken later.
'Cause you can't see
So,
the shadows are wrong.
it doesn't really.
See how
Now,
yours
see,
stands out?
this one reflects.
It should be all black.
This one is
It was taken from that side.
1E.
G.
G? Okay, this is Exhibit G. This reflects a table over the chest area that we used. We actually put the organs on there and used that to examine the organs. Yeah, it was just a metal stand that fitted over the body and
Like
was
an
used.
instrument tray, you know.
Now, since all of this is blurred out, there should have been a scale attached to that to this.
Table.
Yeah, it was a
was a hanging
Yeah,
scale.
it was a hanging scale, and that we used the hanging scale
To weigh the organs.
to weigh the organs. And
But would it necessarily show in that picture?
well, the areas are blank out. The other thing that really that's really impressionable as far as none or very little of the area around the table shows in the photographs. Almost all of it is blanked out. The one that we examined earlier, I think that Paul
Cropped out too.
and I.
Floyd, when you took your pictures, how much of the room would have shown? More than this?
Yeah.
How far away were you from the table when you?
4, maybe 5 feet.
You were never closer from some of them?
For a few shots, yes, but on
So
the
4 or 5
average,
feet.
no.
How many feet away would you say these pictures are taken?
Well, it's hard to tell because I don't know what scale they cropped them to.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that could have been taken with a telephoto lens at 100 meters
Yeah.
and enlarged to just that area. But now, if that would have been a contact print, just a film and a sheet of print paper exposed to each other, then you'd have more of an accurate
Look how clean the hair
idea as
is.
to how much of that negative was printed.
All right, you say there's no entry wound showing in this picture, Paul, in the colic area, whereas it does show in the other back of the head picture here, as I understand it. There's supposed to be an entry wound here now, according to the...
Not that I remember at all. I don't remember any entrance wound. I don't remember any definition showing where a projectile would have gone through the bone or anything.
And in that area of the skull, I don't think it would have been possible to see it anyway.
Yeah.
I think, as Dr. McClellan said, this area was a gaping wound, and I think that all of us have basically perceived the wound as in the same manner. And to me, at no time other than at the final aspect of the autopsy, or after the autopsy, when the body was being prepared, did any of this even relate, especially the ones without showing the massive wounds.
You don't think that any big flap of scalp is being pulled up here to cover this?
No, I don't think so.
I'm going to show this. This is Exhibit B.
I don't think that.
Well, another thing too is look how shiny and clean the hair is.
Right.
Yeah. In the color pictures, actually, the scalp is an entirely different color. The hair is an entirely different color. It's black, and around it is red hair. The scalp is perfectly white, whereas it's yellow. The skin and the scalp is yellow. This is very wet. The rest of it is very dry. This is washed clean. See, there are many problems with this.
Based on that, what would your conclusion be about this photograph?
I don't think it was taken in the morgue. My impression is that it was not a photograph taken.
Had they been taken to the funeral home?
That I don't really know.
No.
I don't think so, because see, my understanding is that the body went directly from the morgue to the rotunda.
Yeah,
It
that's
did.
right.
They embalmed the
That's
body
why
right
this-
on the next table.
Yeah.
They brought in,
I'm sorry, could you repeat that statement?
they took the body after the autopsy and removed it. So you had 2 tables like this in the morgue, and they took it to the back table where a mortician, Gauze and Sons, I think, of Washington, Gallers, came in and completely embalmed, dressed, and did everything to the body.
Did the
All the
cosmetics?
cosmetics were done right there on the table. And I remember helping lift him into that big wooden casket.
But
The casket he was buried in?
It was a great big massive wooden casket.
yeah, it looked like he was a rosewood and mahogany or something like
Mahogany,
that.
I think.
It was a beautiful piece of wood.
It was heavy. It was
Well, the
unbelievably
final
heavy.
casket was mahogany, black mahogany.
Just, I don't know if this was a black. It was.
If you
It
were
wasn't
taking
black,
a-
it was dark.
getting
It was
ready to
dark
take a
brown.
picture, a lot of these photographs at autopsy, would you not have put a clean, would somebody have put a clean towel underneath? See, we do this in surgery. You've got a lot of blood around, but if you're really trying to get a nice picture every once in a while, you'll wall it off and put some clean towels or drapes around it so that you know, you have contrast. Could
Right.
this have been done in the,
Oh,
Well, it wasn't done there.
I mean, you
Yeah.
didn't have it,
No.
you were doing the pictures and this
I was
wasn't
taking-
being done?
No.
Okay.
So, Floyd,
Yes.
based on that, what does that draw you to conclude then?
You don't want all that.
Really, that they didn't know what they wanted. You know, I mean, everything was hurry up and do this and then don't do it.
right.
So I don't know.
I think,
With regard to the pictures,
With the pictures, well, I was just taking pictures. The doctors had moved, and I'd slip in between them and take some pictures. I didn't know really what they all wanted, so I had to use my own judgment. And they, being an enlisted man with all that officer material there, all them stars, you didn't just pick something up and, you know, drape something, and then maybe they were looking at it. They'd come down on you like something else.
but
Did
some
you
of the,
develop the pictures yourself?
No,
No.
they would not let us touch them once they were taken.
You just took the pictures? And the
But
film, the camera too was taken from you?
No, they double-checked the camera, make sure it was emptied.
but you would say there's something wrong with some of these photographs.
Definitely, a lot wrong with quite a few of them.
And what was the phrase that you used in the past, talking about those pictures?
They were phony. When it's somebody's
Could you
dream
say that
that.
in a complete statement?
Well, I believe that the bigger part of the pictures that we have here today are phony. They're paste ups.
How many did you shoot that night?
Oh, golly, I took about 5 rolls of 35 millimeter film. 4 black and white film packs, which there's 12 in each pack. And Mr. Stringer shot, I would say, 25 or 30 color negatives.
Well, where are all these
That's
pictures?
a good question. I've
Would
asked.
you know if you could make black and white prints from, like contact prints from, in 1963, directly from color?
No, you had to make what they call an internegative, which it can be done.
Yeah, how'd you do that?
You just took your color print, printed it on a piece of film. That came out as a positive, then you reverse it.
But did that film
Print that.
exist in 1963?
Sure.
Okay.
But you don't know where all the pictures are that were,
No.
No, they burned.
But
There was
I
what was
asked-
known as the burn party in the Secret Service office in Washington. They burned almost all of the evidence when it was to be turned over to the National Archives, and this is about all that survives.
Now these, where are these housed? Are these your personal photographs?
These I brought to the
But
meeting.
they're part of your own personal file?
Right. Do you
but
have
they're
another-
from the archives, is that right?
They're exact reproductions. Al, do you have?
Yeah, what I'd like to do, because we are running just about out of time with all of your experience here. If we could start with you, Floyd. I'd just like to get a statement on camera of your own personal opinion about whether you feel this Warren Commission was accurate, there was a cover-up, there was a conspiracy, whatever. Just whatever you feel is your own opinion. Just do it in a complete statement.
Well, as far as the Warren Commission goes and their report, I don't think it was accurate. In fact, I'd almost swear that it was not an accurate report. From what I've been reading and read in several books, that they weren't given all of the evidence, or they were only given the evidence that the government wanted them to have, so they would come out with the conclusion that the government already had before the Warren Commission was even formed. So a lot of this evidence was doctored, I believe, or the photographic evidence anyway, was doctored to fit the story that the government wanted put out. And as far as a conspiracy, there had to be a conspiracy somewhere in order to have all of this done. I mean, there was so much work that had to be done on the photographs alone. And somebody had to know about it and not tell.
Could they have made a perfect medical forgery out of the body to fool your camera?
Not in the short period of time that they had, no, I wouldn't think so. But it could have been done over a period of time, but they only had a matter of hours.
That's right.
And I don't think that would have been possible.
Yeah.
Not with,
Morticians told me it'd take a week to do it.
well, I didn't think they'd do it in a couple hours.
I've always thought it was a massive cover-up, and like he said, for this to fall into place like it did, it doesn't happen this way. You just can't, in a matter of hours, have everything in place to have all these things happen. They just don't work that way. So I've always thought there was a massive cover-up, and I don't know who, from where, or how high.
Well, I can't really reflect on the Warren Commission or any of the other books that have been written or information that's been given, because over the past years I've kind of limited myself to an outside influence on purpose, primarily because I had the questions that I've asked today and so forth, and I didn't want to prejudice those. I had some doubts at the time of the things that I remembered. I may have been reflecting on another autopsy that I participated in or at another facility. After viewing the photographs and relating them to what I remember, I think that the photographs certainly were not taken the night of the autopsy, and some of the photographs reflect items that did not exist in the morgue, as I remember it. And I have a fairly graphic memory. I've at one time sat down and drew the morgue to see if I was correct. I think that over the years and the government certainly has fabricated evidence, manipulated evidence. I guess fabrication may be strong because that's an accusation, and I really don't have hard evidence to prove the accusation after 20-something years. But discussing with Dr. McClellan, Dr. Williams, Ms. Bell, Mr. Reich, they have basically confirmed that what I remember was very accurate. And also I talked to Paul several years ago, and then what we had talked about then, and the only disagreement, our differences, it really wasn't a disagreement, was what I saw as far as the brain was concerned and what Paul saw. I think that is just a reflection of our perception. It may also be the fact is that I looked at the brain outside the cavity and so forth, whereas the other people had looked at it inside the cavity. The weight of the brain, I'm surprised that it was at 1,500 grams. I would have suspected that probably it would have been 12, 13. Again, because I reflected it was a smaller brain. My perception at the end of the autopsy was the fact is that there had been at least 2 bullets. The one doing the injury to the head had been slightly anterior and above the ear, and I had related that back to the conversation of the gray marks on the bone. The other one being in the back of the neck, or below the back of the neck at the level of the scapula. I had read some information and had heard through discussions with TV and so forth about the bullet wound in the neck. And I had reserved my opinion of that until I had talked to someone from Parkland. I now feel like that probably that was an entry wound. My question is, where did that bullet go? It would not, and my perception as far as anatomy, and I may be wrong, is that a bullet in the front of the neck would have done a considerable amount of damage to the tracheal area. If I'm wrong, please correct me.
Well, I think that the Warren Commission and most all of us kind of looked at the way it was originally Lee Harvey Oswald.
Could you begin this statement again,
Okay. I believe that the Warren Commission, as well as all the rest of us, believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was totally responsible for the murder part of it, and evidence was destroyed or overlooked or whatever that has ruined the whole investigation as far as it can be reopened. I believe now that there's been a lot of evidence destroyed. I know personally that I was interviewed by FBI, but there's nothing in my file to show that I was interviewed except for a year later. And I had extensive interview with them the day that it happened, and there's nothing in file to show that. There's other people I know who were interviewed by FBI that everything was covered up. There's no record of it whatsoever. So I think, in a way, the government either tried to place the responsibility on the Dallas Police Department and destroyed the evidence, or they just didn't care. As far as conspiracy, I couldn't prove it, so I can't say yay or nay on that. But the doctor mentioned that the head flew back. Acceleration of the car could make the head fly back. And, there's several different theories you could use on that. I kind of believe in my mind, back of my mind, there is other people involved in this, and there was more than one shot fired. But I can't prove it.
The car did not accelerate.
Well, it had to accelerate whenever the guy heard a gunshot. The gunshot, the man had to accelerate, that would make the body fly backwards. So.
Well, it was some seconds after the shot when it took off. But it was.
Well, I would agree with what the others have said, that it certainly seems that there's some kind of cover-up. Whatever the source of the cover-up is, perhaps we'll never know, but over the years there have been far too many people from too many different sources and too many areas who have a lot of knowledge about it, or were in a position to have a lot of knowledge about it, who have brought up large numbers of inconsistencies. And I think what we've talked about here today has further emphasized those inconsistencies, particularly in regards to the photographs, and particularly in regard to the photograph showing the x-ray of the wound in the front rather than the back of the skull, whereas we've seen, all of us have said that the wound was in the back of the skull, both the Bethesda doctors and the Bethesda autopsy people, as well as the people, all of the people at Parkland. In regard to the entrance wound in the neck, again, Dr. Perry, as I recall, did say that he thought that the tracheostomy wound was started through what appeared to him to be an entrance wound in the neck, and then it was enlarged to make the tracheostomy placement possible. In my view of the Zapruder film, and I've watched that any number of times, I also, just by happenstance, know Mr. Zapruder and operated on Mr. Zapruder, as a matter of fact. He, I think, certainly gave us a very important piece of evidence in that film, and I was looking for exactly what you were talking about the car jerking the head backward. But in the slow motion frames, if you look at when his head is hit and is snapped back by the shot, which looks to me like it comes from the front, not from the back, then there's another couple of 3 frames in the slow motion before the car begins to accelerate, and the head is already well on its way back. So that was not the acceleration of the car, in my opinion, and I've watched for that on a number of occasions in reviewing that film, and that's consistently what I've seen. I'm convinced that he was hit from the front, that he was, for some reason or other, was slightly bent over, which I think that's shown in the photos, and at that time he was hit perhaps from a bullet fired from the grassy knoll in front and to the right of the car, which entered somewhere in the front lower part of the head, blew out this massive posterior wound, and then exited out the back. And of course a number of witnesses have seen portions of the skull and the brain flying out toward the back of the car, and that would seem to be virtually impossible to occur with a bullet fired from behind and to the right. That's not what you would see, even taking into account some of these fanciful projections about the jet effect of the brain causing the head to paradoxically move in the wrong direction. I don't think the jet effect of the brain, I'm no ballistics expert, but the jet effect of the brain is not what the effect of a high velocity bullet would be in throwing the head backward when it hit the president. So I think that there is a cover-up on what happened. We may never exactly know what the source of it and what the nature of it is.
Audrey?
Well, I've really enjoyed this discussion today, and I have learned a lot by being able to talk to you all from Bethesda to confirm a lot of what we felt down here, because I think there'd been some odds. I think it'd be difficult for us to ever really know what truly happened on that day. I have never subscribed to the Warren Commission and quote the one bullet theory, because in the years at Parkland, we never taught that bullets traveled in the manner in which the one that we took out of the governor, or that we operated on from the governor, was supposed to have traveled to have gotten from him. You know, they don't take right angles. So I'm glad to hear that some of the rest of you are that way. I hope we find out. It would be nice in my lifetime to find out what really happened, but I'm afraid that we probably never will, but I do feel better about a lot of it after hearing you all today and knowing that you've had some of the same concerns that we have.
Can I ask? Okay. This is the bullet that was supposed to have shot both men. The fragments that you saw, you might want to say on camera, could they have come from that bullet? This is the bullet that they claim was found on the stretcher at Parkland, which was in fact the stretcher of a small boy.
We see this description.
The center bullet there.
That's all the fragment that was supposed to be off?
Well, no, that little nick is what the FBI took off for their spectrographic tests, which they never made public.
Not only did we remove
the center bullet.
Not only did we remove fragments, but Governor Connolly still had a few fragments left in his thigh. We didn't get all of them. We just got the larger ones.
So Governor Connolly today is walking around with the proof that this was a conspiracy in his leg.
If it's proven that, and if they're still there. I don't know that they have been taken out, but we did not take them out on this particular day. We just took out the...
I think he's keeping that evidence close to him.
Well, it might be good.
Every time he goes through airport security.
It may not be that much in there for airport security now.
But you're saying that bullet, which
we took off several fragments.
Yeah, it could have come or could not have come from that bullet.
I think that what we took off was greater than what is missing from this bullet.
Much greater?
Yes, and I had heard that that was one reason they disappeared, because they weighed more.
Dr. Williams?
Well, it's certainly been the most informative gathering, and over all these years, it's interesting that how such an important event in time in American history can still be recalled with such detail, and certainly that's the beauty of the human brain. But I'm convinced, as I always have been, that this was unexplained. A lot of the activities of the people in Washington. I just know that with folks like Bob McClellan, whose integrity and ability and brilliance is well regarded by many, and for the many others that were there, that there's a lot yet to be found. And it's just sad that an investigation like this has not come forth far before now, and cooperation has not been available. I'm saddened to the fact that there are other people who probably have really a lot more detailed information that would be helpful to this investigation, and hopefully in time that they will realize that and make their contribution that would be certainly part of our American history.
I want to thank everybody for coming here, and God bless you all. And I believe that what we just experienced is a historical event of great importance, because this case isn't going to die, and we're not going to let it go. A lot of us love John Kennedy. Maybe all we did was shake his hand, but by God, we're not going to let this case go. Thank you, Hunter.
This has really been informative to me. I must say this, I've had the books and I've looked at the books, but I've never been to the Kennedy Museum downtown, and I've got to renew my interest in this.
Yeah.
I went
you
down
better
there
do it in a
last
hurry.
year.
You should also go to
John's
the
getting ready
museum.
to.
There's another center there that you should go to in at the West End Marketplace,
Right.
third floor, that all these gentlemen have been to, and
Well,
it's called the
that's-
JFK Assassination Information Center.
But that's one down.
I think they just
That's the
closed
sixth
that.
floor.
You're talking
It's
about
the
They
sixth
just
floor.
closed it. I read in
No.
the paper the other day that they had some financial problems.
No, we
Is
were there
that
last
the one?
night.
Well, okay,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
a
No,
Is
they're
different
not.
this the sixth floor?
No,
the-
because Oliver Stone. No, that's different. Sixth floor is in the Texas School
Yeah.
Book Depository, and that's the
That's where
more.
the current museum is.
That's the
Yeah, they have a
semi-official.
museum up there.
But
They
there's
have
an
two
alternative
museums.
museum with films and presenting more of the real evidence that we're discussing here. And that's on West End Marketplace on the third floor. It's called the JFK Assassination Information Center. Al knows where it is. They've been.
Across from Spaghetti Warehouse there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
is
is that
it?
right?
Yeah. And you should go there
Is
because
that the old jailhouse?
No,
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 Oliver
that's there,
Stone's
one of those old
giving them a
factories,
lot
I
of money,
guess.
and so they're going to keep their doors open for a while.
Have you talked to him? Oliver
I
Stone?
haven't. I
Yes,
talked
I
to
have.
some of them.
Maybe.
Development, center exposure, those
When is he going to start that?
15th of April.
15th, he's already
Well,
doing
he's
it.
talking
Cass
about
is
the
here.
Garrison
Yeah.
case from New Orleans, or Garrison trying. his
Jim Garrison is
prosecution.
based on a book about Jim Garrison.
I got that started partly with my hole that I said.
That was Dr. Lito Porto, I think.
No, I walked into the room and Pepper Jenkins said, "Bob, there's a bullet hole here." And I wrote down in my first statement that there was a bullet hole in the left temple.
Right.
Pepper later didn't remember telling me that, but he did.
He put you out on a limb.
And so Jim Garrison got a hold of that and built a lot of his ideas.
Yeah.
He thought there was someone in the storm sewer over on the other
Yeah.
side
We
who
went and looked
fired
at
a
it the
bullet
other day.
from that. But he never talked to me before he subpoenaed me. He
Dr.
subpoenaed me
Jones says
before
that
he
this
talked to
was
me.
a handgun. He believes it was a handgun shot. Actually, you could have stood behind that fence and done it with a pistol. It was a very simple.
About the only place you could actually aim a weapon would be by the picket fence. I walked up there. I went for the very first time in my life last year. Came out to Dallas here, and I was really shocked about how small the Dealey Plaza is. And the only place that they could actually get a clear shot of that president was the picket fence. area.
That's the place you'd pick, isn't it? It really
And
is.
also, if you were going to shoot him and you were in that sixth floor window, when you go up there, look up Houston Street where the car had come down Main Street and turned onto Houston and came right toward the window, toward the school book depository. Then it turns back